do that, if we're trying to attract a highly skilled population, and if you look at the job Google searches for Sechelt, a lot of the jobs that are available here are in healthcare. We need to draw those people here to the Sunshine Coast so that they can fill those roles to support us. Another initiative is also finding childcare that's affordable for many families here on the Sunshine Coast so that they can have opportunities to contribute back into our community as workers. But you know what? If there isn't that opportunity for their children, they're not going to be contributing to our local economy. And so I believe that we need to focus on creating opportunities for families where they feel supported. And then also, if we're going to be a service sector, because we're looking at younger people and older people, well, we have to provide opportunities for people, the working group, to sustain themselves here on the Sunshine Coast and in Sechelt. And what I mean by that is that if we're going to be focusing on service-oriented opportunities in healthcare and in childcare, well, we need to complement that with small businesses. So, for example, when I just visited Nelson a couple weeks ago, it's sustained by a lot of small businesses where young families and young people want to live there. They want to live there. And so I believe that we have to complement this need with the small businesses, which is a strength on the Sunshine Coast. And how can we draw that and create opportunities and lower some of the barriers so that some people can innovate and create self-employment, and with that self-employment or small business, create employment for others. And that's going to keep us sustainable on the Sunshine Coast, is focusing on that working group, and so that we can support the aging population, but also our younger population, and having family opportunities to stay here as well. So thank you.
Thank you. There's two parts of this question that I want to deal with. The first is that I don't see it as a challenge. In fact, if you read my website and look at the information I look at the retirement age group and people moving here as one of our great opportunities. And I think it's a sustainable opportunity. It's a sustainable opportunity over the next 30 years at least, and if we do it right, it can continue past that. Part of the problem with the question and with our thinking is that the issue of dependent, in 1940s when Stats Canada started to do this kind of work, and just after the Second World War, they identified those under 18 or those who were retiring in 64, 65 as therefore dependent on the workforce. That does not reflect the reality today. Most people I know in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are not dependent on the workforce for their income and their wealth. We have an entirely different world economy and a different Canadian economy than we had in the 50s and 60s and 70s. I don't view retirees as dependent on the workforce. I know I'm not. I know the people I know in the 60s and 70s and 75-year-olds are not dependent in that way. They have investments, they have entrepreneurial initiatives, they have pensions, yes, of course, but those are usually fully funded, and we have to take that into account. The kind of retirees that are coming to Sechelt usually bring with them wealth. They can choose to live anywhere they want. They can live in San Diego if they prefer. They can live in Nelson. They could live in Toronto or Vancouver. They're coming here because they want to live here. What we do have to do, and this fits in with our economic development, is think through what a 55 or 60-year-old person needs when they're coming to Sechelt, and they'll be looking at what they need when they're 85, 90, or 95. We need to aggressively, as Christine suggested, target health care and assisted living centers, the issue of complex continuing care for people in their 80s and 90s. So the entire health area is something we do have a real strength and possibility of building very good jobs. We have the housing, which is in fact, compared to Vancouver, very affordable, and that's a mechanism to bring forward professionals who are attached to the health industry around UBC and UBC research hospitals to come and do gerontology work or care work here. So we do have to work with developers who are interested in actually providing those kind of assisted care facilities and creating the infrastructure that people will want for an accessible community in their 80s, 85, 90, 95, or if we get to be 100 years old. So don't think of retirees as dependent. Don't think of them as a challenge. Think of them as an opportunity. I'll come back to the economy on some other questions, but we are living in an entirely different economy than the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And in fact, we do not rely on jobs, and we can't think of jobs as being the sole core of our economy any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the second question. So there are mixed messages in this economy here on the Sunshine Coast, and I would ask our candidates to address their concerns or their initiatives, how they think they can address the economy. And we will start this question with Christine.
This is an interesting conundrum, and it's when you hear those stats that reflect how things are happening in Sechelt and on the Sunshine Coast. I think what I want to share with you is that what brought me here today, what brought myself to bring my name forward, was my work with the Community Resource Center Progress Plan. And I had the opportunity to interview some women from the food bank, and hearing their concerns about housing, food, and their part of the local economy. And one thing I really want to sort of focus on, and I would agree with Bruce Milne, is that our economy has changed. I'm a huge supporter with looking at social enterprise and how we can create small businesses that might be different from what we are used to, that might have actually opportunities where we're going to, as a district of Sechelt, educate young entrepreneurs to come in to find different ideas that they can come in and implement with their small businesses and collaborate, not work against each other, but collaborate with each other to create a profit, but in return, give back to the community. This is where my headspace is that we are not necessarily, it's not in it for us as an individual, but we are all working together as we are working on our local economy together. So I want to see opportunities in the District of Sechelt where we're providing educational opportunities for new entrepreneurs, current entrepreneurs, how they can actually thrive and springboard to the next level, or even that entrepreneur who wants to create a succession plan. How do we do that? And in that process is how can we give back to our community so that we're all thriving and prosperous in that process. So I would like to support small businesses in this. How can we reduce some of those barriers so that we can actually see some creativity and maybe a little different from what we're used to, but be open to those ideas and have those conversations with the community.
The economy. There's no question that insecurity over the economy is reflected in the stats in the Vital Signs report. And what I see it as the disappearing middle class. And there's a huge stress for younger people in the 25 to 35-year-old group when they're trying to think of having families and entering into the more middle class life, realizing that the future is very, very insecure and they're anxious. There's also the reality that the 40 to 55-year-old group in Sechelt and across Canada are not attaining middle class status. It's been a real struggle. And the middle class for 2014 is nothing like the middle class of 1990. And the world that some 40-year-olds grew up in terms of being in the 1990s, was totally different. Middle class people now are struggling with usually two incomes, very large mortgages, maybe one car as opposed to two cars, and it's an entirely different life. That's what's reflected. At the same time, retail sales are up, people are spending money, and there's a fair amount of money flowing through the economy. Part of that, of course, is because of this new retiree group, which are not dependent, but are actually bringing solid income through the community in their various ways. The other thing about the economy I want to speak about is the fact that we are still in a transition from an older resource-based economy into a new economy that is based on a digital world, quite basically, and very different than the one we're used to. Very similar to when the agricultural community in the pre-First World War, 1910, 1915, had almost 90% of the working population, transferred through, by the time the Second World War was over, farming was down to 10%, it's now down to almost 5%, and manufacturing is now being displaced by an entirely new economy. In 1998, I wrote a piece for the Chamber of Commerce here about the jobless economy. Everything in that is still accurate. People, in fact, need to create wealth and are moving towards wealth opportunities. Small business is one form of that, but the idea of getting a job that will stay at for 20 or 25 years is simply gone. So we have to look at the alternative and ways that we can encourage that alternative wealth creation for individuals. When we first came to Sechelt, and my partner Irene was teaching at CHAP, getting a job at BC Ferries or down in Port Mellon Mill was a great job for almost all of our students. Students graduating now can't even think about that. And the entire middle class dream associated with that has been shifted on its ear. We have to take that into account. What is available are the opportunities that come from creative entrepreneurial activities, and I've just run out of time. Thanks. We'll come back to it.
Okay, well, I guess from my point of view, first of all, I want to say that the concept that we can build this economy on tourism jobs and on home-based businesses is naive. We cannot do it with those and not have jobs that are much broader, jobs that people have trained for, jobs that people want. Not everybody, even though I'm an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur for over 30 years. I've helped create, I think, 7 businesses here on the Sunshine Coast and many others in Vancouver and elsewhere. You need to have a mixture of talents. You need to have a mixture within our economy of a wide variety of opportunities. And so I'm staying with that. We need jobs. We need jobs because not everybody is ready to work for 3 or 4 months in the tourism industry and go on EI through the winter. You know, we made one thing that the district has done and we have to do more of is we've improved the efficiencies and the attractiveness of doing business in Sechelt, but we've got lots more to do. We can always do more and we will. We need to make it easy for business. We need to make it easy for entrepreneurs to say yes to doing business in Sechelt. Another thing, you know, the issue with BC Ferries is a real juggernaut. There is no easy solution. And I'm sorry, but protesting and issuing demands of a provincial government that is very strong on saying they're not going to increase our taxes and they're not going to use deficit funding to cut our fares, it means we have to find a better way of achieving what we all want, which is affordable and more reliable ferry service, and we will. I've spent a lot of time working with the provincial government over the last 3 years, and we have some very good relations now that we can draw on. Another part that I'd really like to talk about, you know, is the idea that of the airport. And the airport, Mr. Everman, is something that will help grow the economy. It will create some jobs that people love. People who've gone to school at BCIT really want to work in the aeronautic business. So let's give them some jobs here. Powell River's doing it, why can't we? And we can do it, and I will only support it if we can build it where it's no cost to the taxpayers. That's what we did for the Sechelt Water Resource Center. That, for those of you who are not on sewer, you are not paying anything for that facility just across the way. Sorry, across the way. For those of you who are on sewer, you pay $379 a year, and that's all it's going to cost. So, I mentioned, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I look forward to supporting and helping others. That's my career, is building and helping people start new jobs. So, you can count on me to use my experience and skills to deliver on what we need to address the economic challenges here in Sechelt. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Our final question is on social issues. And there is a large demand for affordable housing locally, with sustainable numbers of families, or substantial numbers of families, on wait lists. What specific steps would you see the District of Sechelt taking to improve the social conditions that lead to these kinds of difficulties? Bruce.
Thank you very much. So there's 2 issues here, and I had trouble with this question as well, because the first line on the early development assessment vulnerability has nothing to do with social issues. You can have a communication vulnerability or an emotional vulnerability and come from whatever class, social class you might be in. And the school district is very clear when they're doing those assessments that it's not related to poverty, it's not related to social issues. So I think the question is primarily about social issues and about affordable housing. On the social issues and the youth in care, I think we need to work really carefully with some of the programs that local governments have already put in place, and I think we're doing fairly well. in terms of youth support workers, restorative justice, community schools. We have youth drop-ins. These are either run through the regional district with support from Sechelt, or they're being run through the school district and the community schools. But there are things that we're doing now to care for youth in our community that need that extra attention. On the other hand, these are in fact provincial issues, and I'm a pretty clear advocate of sticking close to what your own jurisdictional responsibilities are, mow your own lawn, and governments at the local level have to be careful not to step into provincial issues over and over again. We don't agree with downloading. We also don't want to take on things when we only have a property tax as opposed to other kinds of taxes to do these things with. On affordable housing, there's many things we can do, some that we're doing quite well, and some which the new zoning bylaw, which is coming forward under Mayor Henderson's watch, is going to do quite well as well. So we've got issues like amending existing bylaws so that we can, in fact, increase the density in various areas, and that's something that's coming. We can incorporate smaller, more affordable housing, and we've been doing that for some time. In fact, the small lot subdivision where Chris lives in Cascade Heights was something we did in 1998, opened it up so we could in fact have it, what at the time was considered more affordable housing, and it allowed seniors and young families, which Chris's was at the time, to move into those areas. So there are things we can do and are doing. We can identify inclusionary housing, so that's my 30-second note.
No, got 1 minute left.
1 minute, oh, good. We can identify city-owned property that we might be able to lease to nonprofits. In terms of the core affordability, if we look at the social housing, I think the Lions property at Green Court is a really good example of multi-level partnerships where the District of Sechelt, a nonprofit, the Lions, and BC Housing came together to do something which was very good. We've also got a stellar example of social housing just over on Inlet, which the Sunshine Coast Association for Community Living did as a nonprofit with a private sector developer, and that worked well. So the social housing issue, I think there are different avenues that we're already looking at we can move towards. The affordability for wage earning people is a very different issue. Because on the one hand, we've got the lowest interest rates in history and the most affordable housing in the Lower Mainland, and yet it's not affordable for people with low wage, low income jobs. And one thing that Mr. Henderson and I totally agree on is you can't build an economy on low paying minimum wage jobs in tourist industry that last for 3 months or 4 months. We'll come back to the economy, I'm sure.
You know, when I read this, and initially I read about the children in care, and I wondered how on earth, we're saying we don't have enough young families, how on earth do we have enough, more than the provincial average of children in care? And you know, it doesn't, even one child is too many. But I guess I'm struck, some of you know Chief Clarence Louis from the Osoyoos Indian Band is quite progressive, and he was speaking here last month. And I just wanted to read you a quote. He said, even in 2013, there are a large number of Native kids who are being apprehended by the Ministry of Children and Families, taken away because their household is so dysfunctional. I asked one of the welfare workers, you guys have stats. When you go into these houses, I bet in the vast majority there is nobody in that household working. And she said, yes. I said, there's the friggin' problem. If our kids start being raised in households where people are working and have a decent income, the vast majority of our problems are going to go away. I so believe in that. And that's why it's so very important that we do focus on how do we attract the investment.